Welcome to February 2015's Coffee with Manitou session part 3. We start and end this video with Brian Hardy explaining the differences between RTO and RPO.
Now, the next thing to consider when you're referring to backups and backing up your data, you want to look at RTO versus RPO. RTO, recovery time objective. RPO, recovery point objective. One is looking at what is your downtime tolerance. Most of us would say none. Or how fresh does your data need to be? That's looking at the recovery point objective. Now, the recovery time objective is basically the time that you are committing to returning an application online following a failure, whether it's lightning or fire or whatever the disaster might be. It's the maximum length of a given time that the application can be offline or the data can be offline. Now, the RPO described also impacts the RTO as well, and we'll talk about the RPO here in just one second. So if we're using the same example as an RPO, say you back up your data each night at 8 p.m., and for some reason the building is struck by lightning at 5 o'clock the next day. God forbid, we don't want that to happen. Our recovery point goes all the way back to 8 p.m. the previous day. All the data that was changed or added or deleted starting at 8:01 p.m. to 5 p.m. the next day is now what? Lost. So the question that remains is, how long will it take for my organization to get back up online with the appropriate data? If the server dies, how long will it take for me to upload the backup from the network? If the server dies and the network dies, how long will it take for me to travel to go to that off-site location for the external backup of storage that I might have, and then travel back to my site with the external backup storage, get the network back up, get the server back running, and the data reloaded to the network, to the server, and back up online? That is RTO. So let me start with the examples where I am sure I'm describing someone's worst nightmare today, and that's not what I want to do. But in the backup use case, this could be copying data from a backup storage device, such as a disk or tape, across the network and then onto the production server. Not only does the transfer across the network take some time is the operative word there, but it also takes time to write all of the data too. Remember that writes are always slower than reads, even on flash storage. So with writes are further slowed down because the data is written to a RAID-protected primary storage device. That means RAID parity calculations need to be calculated as well. So a lot really goes into that factor. So in other words, it can take a long time to get back up, so downtime could be significant as it relates to your recovery time objective. Now, when we look at recovery point objective, this here, we're looking at the amount of data that you can afford to lose if an application has to be recovered. What is the most data that I can lose? How fresh or stale is the data? In most cases, data protection is not a continuous activity. There is, of course, a time window between protection events. During this window, data is created, modified, and deleted, and the protection process does not capture the data changes until the next production event occurs. So that means if there's a failure or an event or anything of that nature, those additions and changes and deletions, they're just completely lost. So for an example, if you're doing a backup once per night, changes are made throughout the day. If you have a storage system failure, let's say 4 p.m., all the data that was added, changed, or deleted from the time the business opened for the day until 4 p.m., of course, that would be unfortunately lost. So for user files, this could be a great inconvenience. For a high transaction application, it could be catastrophic. So the more important the data is, the more important it is to provide a narrow RPO. And the problem is the more narrow the RPO, typically the more expensive the data protection solution becomes. It all comes back to, of course, cost. Also, capturing an application's transaction logs, which is an option too, cannot be considered as a way to fulfill the RPO of an application, because while it does help, it surely helps, since information does not need to be manually rekeyed. However, it takes time for those logs to be replayed. So the more changes represented in a transaction log, the longer it will take to replay those, and the harder it will be to meet a more narrow RPO. So moral to the story here is to back up each night. If you were to, back up at each night, struck by lightning at 5 the next day, our recovery point is all the way back to 8 p.m. the previous day. So that data, again, would be lost. So now, the RTO and RPO are not the only factors to really consider. There are some honorable mentions again, and they are VRO and GRO. And VRO simply means version retention objective, and GRO is geographic redundancy objective. So the moral to the story is know what your RPO time is, and note what your RTO is as well. The best plan is to have the lowest cost solution with the least amount of impact to the organization. Now would probably be a good time to take a quick break.
This concludes Part 3 of the Coffee with Manitou session from February 18, 2015. Register for next month's Coffee with Manitou session at boldgroup.com and check out any upcoming videos on our YouTube page. For more information, contact your account manager today at sales@boldgroup.com.